it's Tamara from Moogly, and I'm live on YouTube. It's June 2018, and I'm coming to you today to talk a little bit about my latest pattern, just to give you a little sneak peek of the next Moogly YouTube video coming. But also, I want to talk today about pattern grading. And I've been advertising this just a little bit on Facebook and Instagram, so hopefully you've seen the notifications there, or maybe on Moogly, and you'll come join us to talk a little bit about grading. So while we wait for people to sort of sort on into the room here, let me take a break before we talk about grading while everybody kind of files in. I'm just going to show off the latest pattern on Moogly. If you only follow Moogly on YouTube, you may not have seen it yet. The video tutorial will be coming out tomorrow, but I'm so excited to show you guys. I finally finished the Sea Glass Summer Cardi. That's what I'm calling it. And I was calling it a swim wrap, but I will tell you what, when I started designing this, that's what I had in mind, was a swim wrap. By the time I finished it, I wanted to wear it everywhere. And as I put it out in the blog post, I also did not want to put a picture of myself in a swimsuit on the internet. So personal choice there. But anyway, I think it turned out really, really well. And like I say, the pattern is already up on mooglyblog.com. So right there, you can see it's all finished. And I modeled it a little bit on Facebook this morning. So if you want to check that out, there should be a link in this video description. Hopefully it went in there all right. If not, I'll be coming back and adding it afterwards. And you do that, and then you find the link to the pattern and all the yarns and everything that you need. So I will come back and pin the link to the blog post at the end of this live video. So in the meantime, it looks like some people are joining us. Hello, hi, Cindy, Melody, Josie. Hi, thank you guys so much. Sorry, yeah, no link. I'm going to come back and put the link in afterwards. Getting these live set up is a lot of little factors, and I'm still learning, to be honest. So anyway, watch for the link. I will pin it at the end of the video. So I just showed off the Sea Glass Summer Cardi, and this was made with 2 cakes of Red Heart It's a Wrap Rainbow. If you guys can see it right there. Isn't that pretty? Isn't that a gorgeous yarn? 2 cakes of those is all it takes to make that cardi, and that cardi is one size fits all. It goes all the way up to a 68-inch bust. That brings me to our topic for today. Hi everybody. Okay, so I had a question asked on Facebook. Actually, I asked a question on Facebook. What did you guys want to hear about today? And one of the first responses that was very timely was how to size tops. And that's something I'm working on myself right now because I'm working on a brand new top pattern for Moogly. So let me show you first a sneak peek of the top that I've been working on here. I just had it hidden right behind me. This is made with Red Heart It's a Wrap. Now, not the It's a Wrap Rainbow. This is a slightly different yarn. And there we go. There's what it is so far. I'm a little cropped at this point. Got a few more inches to go here as we head on down past the waist. But you can see this is the kind of top, it's not going to be one size fits all. This top will have 8 sizes, small all the way up to 5X. That means I've been doing something called pattern grading. And when you want to know about sizing tops or skirts or anything that really has to be fitted, unlike, say a blanket or something, where, size matters, but you've got a margin of error in a blanket, we'll say. On something you're going to wear, you want it to fit. So, pattern grading. That's what we're talking about today. All right? So, and I wanted to print that out so you can make sure to understand what I'm saying. Pattern grading. Hopefully that's showing up right way around for you. I know it looks backwards to me, but I've been told YouTube is the right way around for you, so let me know. So, okay. So, pattern grading. What is pattern grading? I've been trying to think of the most succinct way to put it. Pattern grading is figuring out the stitch counts and row counts and the shaping for a variety of sizes for one garment. And as you can imagine, oh, is it backwards? Shoot. Okay. I think once it's not live anymore, it stops being backwards. So hopefully it'll all work out in the end. It's very tricky. I have to do all this on my phone. So, okay. Thank you for letting me know it was backwards. Like I say, I think after it's finished, it'll flip around, but if not, pattern grading, just like you might have thought of grading, on report cards when we were kids, that kind of grading. So if you want to Google it later, that's why I wanted to make sure you had the right spelling. And the reason you might want to Google it is because it is a huge, huge topic. I took a several weeks long course on it myself a couple years ago from Kim Guzman, who is brilliant at it. She has a very involved spreadsheet method that is full of formulas, and you plug in your measurements and from your Gage swatch, and boom, 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 boom. The pattern sort of is made in this Excel spreadsheet. It's a brilliant method of doing it. I think it's probably a popular method of doing it. It's something I need to go back and probably redo the class a few times to really get into my head because I do mine by hand. And that's another way you can do it. Where did I put my little book? Oh, right in front of me. Here we are. Just to show you an idea of what it looks like when I'm grading a pattern, I have pages and pages of notes because I am trying to figure all this stuff out as a relative garment design newbie. I've made garments before, but I've only recently gotten into designing them myself, and having to size more than just say the width and length of a hat, it's a lot more complicated. So I'm still on paper working like crazy, and eventually I hope to get onto the spreadsheets. The other most popular way of doing pattern grading is to hire somebody to do it. I know so many designers who don't do their own pattern grading because it is difficult and it is a lot of math. So it's a very common thing to hire a technical editor or someone along those lines, someone with some more professional skills to do your pattern grading for you, because it can be difficult. That said, basic pattern grading can absolutely be done at home. The simpler the garment, the easier it is. It's one of the reasons I'm starting out making very simple garments as I go on my own garment designing journey, because I know I've got a lot to learn. So I've written this one down both ways, but here is a link I want you to go to if you want to start doing a little bit of pattern grading and figuring stuff out for yourself. And this is the craftyarncouncil.com. There it is that way. And there it is that way. See, this one I was prepared with. craftyarncouncil.com. I'm going to do it both ways here. So no matter when you're watching the video, you'll be able to read that. And on that site, that is the site that all the major yarn manufacturers and everybody's gotten together, and they all come to an agreement on what weight the different yarns are, like what's a fingering, what's a 1, a 2, a 3, a 4 on up. Now we've got jumbo yarn all the way up to 7. But most importantly for this discussion, they also have all the sizes. So if you go to my site and you say, okay, I want to make this sweater, where on earth did she decide? What's a large, what's a small, what's an extra large, what's a 5X? How do you come up with these? craftyarncouncil.com. Again, the sizing standards are what you want to look for, and they're right there on the site. They have them for women, children, men, babies. I wish they had a little bit more foot information for those of us who like to design slippers, but for everything else, that's where you want to go to get your measurements. If you want to start coming up with some of your own designs, for sure. Hi, Rachel. And I printed out, I had so many little papers that I printed out. I must have left those to the side. But anyway, go to that site and you can definitely check out all the different sizes. They have the chest measurements, they have shoulder width, neck to shoulder, neck to waist, and that is really the best place to start. Another great place to get started, oh, I'm so glad you like that, Kathy, thank you, is go ahead and pull out a magazine. I just have the most recent issue of Interweave Crochet right here. Just came in the mail not too long ago, and I marked this page because I want to show this to you guys today. And if you're not familiar with these yet, and I was a little worried about this with the shiny paper. Shiny magazine paper isn't always easy to see. But you want to look for the schematics. And what that looks like is an outline of the pattern itself, and it usually has a bunch of measurements. And I actually drew out a really simple one in marker here, right there. And basically, it's just the shape of the garment as if it was laid flat. So, and somebody just asked, and how do you start? This is a very personal thing. I think probably every designer does it a little bit differently, and it depends what I'm working on. Sometimes I have the idea for the stitch pattern first, and sometimes I'll have the idea for the garment itself first. It's a creative process. So the specific order of things is going to be very personal and just depend on how your project's going. But I want to show you this page again where I've drawn out a very simple schematic for the top that I'm actually working on right now. And basically it's just an outline of the shape of the garment itself. And this can be a really good place to start. And what you want to do is once you've got your basic shape, then you go over to that Craft Yarn Council site, and that's where you start filling in your measurements. Like how deep does an armhole need to be? For the different sizes, you'll find that on that site. How deep does the neckline need to be, or how deep do you want it to be? That's a fashion choice, actually. You won't find neck hole depth on there. That's something you have to decide as a designer. How wide should it be for the different sizes in the body and the waist versus the shoulders? All those measurements are something you'll find on the Craft Yarn Council website. And something to keep in mind when you're doing that is how much ease do you want? And that's another important term to know. In addition to pattern grading, you want to think about ease. Ease is, you can have positive ease, negative ease, or no ease. And ease is basically how much space you've got between you and the garment. So if it was negative ease, like the tank top I'm wearing, then it's very close fitting. If it's positive ease, like this sweatshirt, it's going to be loose fitting. So that means there's a positive numbers versus the measurement of the person wearing it. So you can have positive ease, you can have negative ease, and that's something that you want to add to the measurements or subtract if it's negative on the Craft Yarn Council website because those measurements are more the exact measurements of the person, not necessarily where you'd want to put the garment, unless you really just wanted it to be right up against the skin. So again, those are things to think about. And of course, each size has a range too. Like, let's see, I'm trying to think. I want to say large, and this is off the top of my head right now, but like maybe the large is maybe you'll say 36 to 38 inches in the bust, because of course people are different sizes. And that's part of the challenge of designing. You have to kind of make a decision. Are you going to base your ease off the largest size or off the smallest size? Do you want it to be a little looser? Do you want it to be closer fitting? All of these are involved. And it can be complicated. I'm trying to simplify it a little bit. But yeah, it can be complicated. And it's one of the reasons that I didn't go straight into designing garments. I knew it was going to be a challenge and something I was going to have to figure out as I go. So I just want to share a few of the things I've learned though. And one of the most important things though in sizing the garment, besides getting your good measurements from the Craft Yarn Council site, is the gauge. And this is where gauge gets so important. Again, people write to me like and say, "Oh, my gauge is slightly off. My blanket's gonna be 2 inches wider." And I'm like, "Well, I mean, is that a problem for you?" You know what I mean? If your blanket's 2 inches wider, not necessarily a problem. If it's your shirt, it can be a problem. So gauge for garments is really important. And I know as crocheters, so many of us just want to get right to the project. We don't want to make a gauge swatch. And like I say, for a blanket, I might not do it. Honestly, I don't for blankets because I know there's a range that'll be fine. But for a garment, gauge is important. And I don't know that you're going to be able to read these live, so I'm going to read them out loud too. Hopefully you'll be able to read them in the finished one. So gauge is stitches by rows equals inches per centimeter. And that's how you'll see it in a written pattern. Basically, for instance, in one of my most recent ones, the gauge was 13 stitches by 6 rows equals 4 inches or 10 centimeters in the main stitch pattern. And that's a very common way to see a gauge written out. What does that mean? It means you can use either good old tape measure, or you can use a fancy tool for taking gauge. Ultimately, it's just a fancy tape measure, a fancy ruler, I guess you could say. But basically what you want to do is take your swatch or your garment or whatever you're crocheting already, and ideally you'll have got a good few inches of it in both directions. And then when you hold your ruler up, or your measuring tape or whatever you're using, you can count the number of stitches in a certain measurement, and you can count the number of rows. And sometimes, yes, you do have to round up or down slightly. That is unfortunate. You know, they aren't always going to land on exactly that measurement, but you want to get as close as you can. And once you've got the gauge and you know how many stitches per 4 inches is pretty standard, which is the same thing as 10 centimeters, which is why you'll see 4 inches / 10 centimeters, same measurement. So the number of stitches and the number of rows, and then you've got the measurements that you've got on your schematic from the Craft Yarn Council, that's when you can start figuring out how many stitches do I need in each row to get that width, and how many rows do I need to get that length. And you just start doing the math for each one of those patterns. So you can see, if you're familiar with Excel spreadsheets and that sort of thing, how formulas can be really helpful for this. It's just a little above my skill level right now, something I really need to work on myself. So basically that's how gauge works and why it's important. Because if you are getting more or less stitches per inch, but you're following the written pattern and just following the numbers they're giving you, your garment's going to end up being a different size. So there are a few different ways to fix your gauge if it's only slightly off. And I don't want to get too far into that right now. I think it's probably a topic for another day. But you can absolutely try switching hook size. If your gauge is a little too big or small overall, you can just try switching hook sizes. The hook size given in the pattern is just what the designer used to get that gauge. So feel free to change the hook size if you need to match the designer's gauge. Another thing you can do is change your slit stitches slightly. There's something like, it's called an extended stitch. And if you pull through one loop before you start making the stitch the rest of the way, it's kind of hard to explain. I've got some separate tutorials for that. That can make it just a little bit higher when you're making your stitches. If you pull the loops up a little bit higher, your stitch is going to be higher by the time it's finished. If you pull each of those loops up just a little bit higher. So if you find that your gauge is too short, that can be a little trick. There's lots of little tricks. And like I say, adjusting gauge is probably a topic for another day. So we can come back to that some other time. Excuse me. But the goal is basically, especially if you're designing your own garment, it doesn't matter what your gauge is. It's your gauge. You don't have to worry about matching it to anybody else's. So the important thing is to get your gauge, measure it out, and then you can start figuring out how many stitches and how many inches you need to make that shape. And I will tell you a great tip for this, if you haven't made garments before, but you really just want to go out there and make your own. A little tip I've heard, buy a sewing pattern if you're familiar with sewing patterns before. And then you can literally, if you're more of a visual crocheter, or someone who maybe doesn't like to follow written directions, you can crochet it to the shape of the outlines of the. Oh, sorry about that. It looks like the feed dropped out for just a second. Looks like we're back now. Sorry. Okay. Whew. All right. I know in the finished one, I think it just skips over all that. So hopefully nobody ran away there. Anyway, where was I? So anyway, you want to get your gauge and then you use that to fill out your schematic. That is basically the, that's how it's done. That's how designing is done. It's a lot of trial and error. You start crocheting and say, oh, that idea didn't work. Let's frog it. Let's go back. But one thing I did also want to point out about gauge is if it's going to be a really long garment, you do also want to think about the hanging gauge. Let me show you what that is. Okay, so I've got my little swatch that I started for the top I'm working on right now. And if I clip it to the top of this clipboard here, like so, then I can simulate what it's going to be like more closely to when I'm actually wearing it. Because, of course, you don't put on clothes and then lay down on the floor. You wear clothes and you stand up and walk around. You stand up and sit up. So the weight of the fabric itself is going to pull ever so slightly. So laid flat, it's going to be naturally a little bit shorter than it would be when you're wearing it. So to simulate that, so you don't have to make the entire garment in order to get the weight, one thing you may want to do is take little clips like these. These are Wonder Clips, I believe, by Clover. There's lots of different kinds of this sort of thing. Honestly, you could use clothespins if you've got those sitting around, maybe some heavy stitch markers you might have, and just clip those right to the bottom of your swatch. And that will pull it down just a little bit so you can take perhaps a more accurate row measurement a little bit. Because think about too, and your gauge measurement will change overall. The weight will pull it down this way, and also it'll shrink the width a little bit. So it'll pull in, of course, if you're pulling down this way. Sides are going to have to come in to compensate, just like, you know, your favorite t-shirt does, right? If you pull down on it, sides come in. So same thing. So something to check out with that. So if you're doing some gauge swatching and you're worried about length, just don't forget to try something like that just to see how much it'll grow too. So, okay. Yeah. Oh gosh, I can accuse YouTube. Hopefully it's coming back and working here. It's kind of a slow process. It says it's resuming, but hopefully you guys are just a couple minutes behind me. I know there's a little bit of a lag. So I'm just going to check my notes and make sure I'm not missing any of the ideas about gauge swatching here. Okay, I think that like I say, that's the basics. I know that sounds really simple, and it can be very complicated depending on how much shaping you're doing and how much moving of the fabric around you're doing. But if you're making a simple, boxy, rectangles garment, then grading doesn't have to be terribly difficult. And this is the part now, finally, after that big, long explanation of how to design with it, I wanted to go over a little bit about how to change a pattern that's already out there, which is something I think a lot of people are more likely to do rather than to just jump in designing your own pattern. You're going to see a pattern that you like, but maybe it doesn't come in your size. I want to answer that. Sorry, that question that I saw popped up there real quick. Do you block your gauge swatch before measuring? If I think the gauge is going to be very different when I block it, for instance, I made a shawl a while back that has a very different gauge when blocked than when crocheted. It really opens up with blocking because it's a big lace. Then yes, I would absolutely block that out before I measured it. So that's a good question. Thank you for bringing that up. Okay, so back to how to adjust a pattern. Now, let's say, for example, I was working on a pattern. Actually, somebody mentioned they were making the Saturday sweater. Thank you for doing that. And you know, it's fine. That one's, the Saturday sweater is a really forgiving one. So that's probably one you could get away without swatching too much first. As long as you're using the same yarn, you should be okay with that one, honestly. But we're going to get into more fitted stuff here eventually. So let's talk about that. The Saturday sweater has a gauge of 13 stitches by 7 rows equals 4 inches. So the 5X goes up to 137 inches at its widest. Let's say we wanted to go just 2 inches wider. We just wanted to make that sweater just a little bit wider. We had very wide shoulders. So to bring that up, if it's 13 stitches equal 4 inches, and we want to add 2 inches, then we're going to need to add either 6 or 7 stitches. Do you see why that is? If 13 stitches is 4 inches, then either 6 or 7 stitches is going to be 2 inches. And this illustrates another part of adjusting your patterns. You're going to need to think not just about splitting possibly odd numbers in half, but you're going to need to think about the stitch multiple. So going back to the Saturday sweater, what is the stitch multiple for that one? In order to make that stitch pattern work, you have to have a multiple of 2 plus 1 plus the turning chain. Don't worry about the turning chain right now. We're not worried about chaining. We just want to know the number of stitches we need in each row. So if we need a multiple of 2 plus 1, that means it's going to have to be an odd number. Okay, an odd number of stitches in order for the stitch pattern to work. If we did an even number, we'd have one stitch hanging out on the end that we couldn't work into. So let's go back to it. We want to add 2 inches. We need to add either 6 stitches or 7 stitches. Our multiple is 2 plus 1, so it needs to be an odd number total. If we start with 137 stitches and we add 6 stitches, we get 143. If you add 7 stitches, you get 144. Well, again, it needs to be an odd number for the stitch pattern to work, so we're going to need to go with 143. So that's how you use the stitch pattern to help make that decision for how many stitches to add to that first row. So every stitch pattern is going to be a little different. If it's a lace stitch pattern or a chevron, chevrons tend to have a great big stitch multiple. I've done ones with, I think, 16 or 22 stitches in each stitch multiple. So if I wanted to adjust a stitch pattern that had chevrons by just 2 inches, it might not be possible. Not unless there's a big border that I can adjust or play with the border or the shoulder or something. That's where that adjustment would have to be. Of course, it depends too. If it was with thread, maybe 22 inches. If it was 22 inches, per 4 inches or something, then maybe. But a lot of times those stitch multiples are really great big stitch multiples, and those aren't always the best ones for garments for that reason, because you can't split that up. You can't necessarily use just part of that stitch pattern to complete that row. You have to use the whole big chunk every time. And that's one of the challenges of designing and altering patterns too. So I think that's about it. Yeah, I guess my big takeaway, of course, is to always swatch if you're designing, especially. And also anytime then you're changing the yarn. If you're changing the yarn brand, or if you are just a really tight crocheter, or you happen to know that you're a really loose crocheter, if things always seem to end up too big or always seem to end up too small, then it's a good sign that you should make a gauge swatch. Measure it out, block it. If it's a big lace pattern, if it's something with a lot of holes, you might want to block it first. If it's going to be a really long garment, you might want to do the hanging gauge, put those pins on it, add some weight, see how that's going to change the garment. All of these are considerations, absolutely, but small adjustments can be simple. I talked a little bit about splitting it for, width, if you want to make it 2 inches wider. If you want to make it 2 inches longer and it's a garment, that can be very simple, especially if you just want it to hang a little lower. If the sizing, if the extra inches you need aren't necessarily in the armpit or aren't in the bust, or you just want it maybe just a little bit longer. If you just like your shirts to wear a little bit longer, you don't want them ending right at the waist or right at the hip or wherever, then adjusting for length can be very, very simple. You just usually maintain the stitch pattern for a few more rows or take a few rows off, and you can try it on as you go if you're working top down, or again use the same math. If we go back to our example, in the Saturday sweater, 7 rows equaled 4 inches in length. And so I know if I want to add 4 rows or 4 inches, I can just add another 7 more rows. Except I know I like to end on a, I think I like that one to end on an odd numbered row, so I probably add 1 more. But again, that's just a simple adjustment. Just keep playing with it a little bit until you want the length on that. So adjusting for length on a pattern that already exists can be very easy. For width can be a little bit trickier. You want to make sure too, if you're adding something widthwise on a garment, that you adjust maybe both sides if there's 2 shoulders. All considerations to take, and simply and the simpler the garment, obviously the easier it will be to make those adjustments. I'm sorry I didn't catch your name, but that was a great point. The hook you're using can absolutely also affect your gauge. So if you find again that you're consistently a tight crocheter or consistently a loose crocheter, try a different hook. That can make a difference too. Or if you just really like the hook you're using, try a bigger one. There are differences in the hooks too. If you look at the shaft length, the length of the hook itself, the usable length of the hook, and you're using very tall stitches, that can have a really big effect. So absolutely, in that case, you can try different hook sizes, manufacturers, and see what works for you, both ergonomically and what gives you the most even stitches. Everybody's got a slightly different style, and all these things can absolutely have an effect. So basically that, though, is how grading works. It's a matter of getting the measurements from the Craft Yarn Council. Those are the best guides you've got to work off of. Or you could try buying sewing patterns and sort of meshing those shapes. Pull a favorite garment out of your own closet. You've got that sweater you love. use that, you know, make that first row, hold it up to the sweater, say, oh, that's a little wide, take off a couple stitches. As long as you keep the stitch pattern simple, or if you want to get adventurous and get complicated, then that can be another great way to really create garments that you're going to love. Even if you don't have a pattern that you're on Moogly or anywhere else that you wanted to follow. You can experiment with that on your own. Like I say, check those Craft Yarn Council sizes. And that's a good tip too. If you are looking for a pattern that's already written, and you don't know, I don't know, does that person think I'm a large? Is that person going to think I'm a 2X? I know, you know, when I go out and buy t-shirts, there are t-shirt manufacturers, I buy 3 sizes bigger than I normally buy because they feel so tight. So go to the Craft Yarn Council, can let you know typically what the designers are using to base their sizing on. Now, if you consistently have trouble with the tight tension gauge, with consistency. Sorry, I'm just trying to read that. Melissa, okay. So if you have trouble with consistency, that's I think another good opportunity to try a different hook manufacturer. You may need a hook with a longer shaft. I'm trying to see if I have any hooks over here. Of course, what are the odds? An inch in my house without a hook on it. Okay, well, here's one. This is a Brittany hook, and it's a tiny one, of course. I was hoping to grab a bigger one. You've got the hook portion itself up here. You've got the throat, which is sort of the indented part that you use to snag the yarn into. And then you've got the shaft, this part right here. And if you find that, particularly if you're taller stitches, you know, when you've got a lot of yarn overs, if those top loops are becoming too loose, and that can really affect your gauge or getting floppy, then using something with a longer shaft where you can keep those more consistently the same size, like this, can be helpful. Sometimes hooks with a much shorter shaft, if it starts getting bigger, that can pull that loop that's further back on the hook a little bigger and mess with your gauge as well. Those are some mechanical things. Then I'd say the other biggest part is inside the crocheter themselves. And I'm not trying to like, you know, be mean or anything. This happens to me too. Let's say I'm watching Netflix and I'm watching, you know, something exciting or, you know, tense or scary. My tension's going to change. Absolutely. I've been crocheting for 10 years and typically I can keep a pretty good tension, but there have been times when I'm watching a scary movie, or maybe I'm out talking to my friends, or I'm with some crocheters at a conference and I'm paying more attention to what everybody's saying than my crochet. My tension will go all over the place. Actually, I just watched it happen to a friend at the last conference I was at. She was trying to make 2 little pieces. This is a designer you guys know. Let me put it this way. I'm not gonna name names, but you guys know who she is. And I will tell you, she came with one piece about the size and the other piece the big size, and they were the exact same number of stitches and rows and everything. It was just, she was excitedly talking during one and relaxed and on the plane on the other, and they turned out 2 different sizes. It happens. I think that's one of the reasons it's really popular to make like slippers and socks and mittens, gloves, any of that stuff 2 at a time. Because if you make one and then you come back a few days later and make the other one, you might end up with 2 different size mittens, right? That's why the 2 at a time method is so popular for all those. So that can be a little bit of a help too. But how do you fix that? How do you fix when you find your tensions going bad? Well, obviously, once the stitches are made, you have to frog. But other than that, good advice anytime you sit down to crochet is to just sort of, you know, sit back, make sure you're relaxed, you've got good posture, you're not, you know, worried about, I mean, if you want to crochet as therapy, obviously, put your worry into your stitches, do what you need to do. But if you are going for consistency, sit back, relax, pull your shoulders down. The more your shoulders are up, the more tight your stitches tend to be. I know when I'm tense, you know, that's when my stitches get all tight. I'm going to keep your shoulders down. And if you find your arms getting tired, another good tip is to put a couple of great big pillows, one on each side of you. I kind of discovered this when I was nursing my little ones. But if you put a big pillow on each side and just sort of rest your elbows there as you crochet, it helps keep the shoulders and arms relaxed. And yeah, and just sort of stay relaxed. And then you can get your stitches a little more consistent. And then beyond that, of course, practice, practice, practice. You know, like anything else, I remember the first few rows of chains I made, and maybe more than the first few, were not consistent. They were not pretty. And these days, if I'm not paying attention, they're still not pretty. I think that's one of the reasons I'm a big fan of the foundation double crochet. I spot right away if I'm getting off tension with that one, and I can go back and fix it instead of, you know, chaining 300 and then figuring out, oh, those 4 chains were giant or too small to get into or something. So point is, it can happen to all of us, and just relax, and that consistency will help come. So anyway, we're getting on into it now. Let's see, has anybody, making booties for babies, yeah. One can end up a lot bigger for the other, and that's hard because they're so small. You just want to finish one before you make the other one. I totally get it. So yes, do use for the boppy pillows after the kids get older. Absolutely. Fantastic idea. Great place to rest your, oh, I love those things. You know, you kind of want those for everyday life, don't you? One for each side. But yeah, those are perfect. Throw pillows, whatever you've got. Anything that'll help you stay a little bit more relaxed while you crochet will help. Does anybody else have any questions about Gage that I can answer? Or grading or anything like that? If not, I think that's probably about it for today. I did want to mention that next month I will be at the Crochet Guild of America Conference in Portland, Oregon. That's in July, and it is, I'm staring over at my calendar, I believe it's the 25th through the 28th. And I will be there, and I hope you'll be there. And if you are, I hope you'll come say hi. I would love to see you. I'll be there with my friend Marley Bird from Red Heart. And hopefully I'll be wearing my brand new top made with the Red Heart It's a Wrap. I'm using the Thriller colorway. I'm expecting the small through the large, maybe, and definitely the extra large only need 2 cakes. Small and medium might only need 1. I have to do the math on the actual amount of yarn. It's actually part of the grading. You can go in and figure out how much yarn you use per stitch, and then use one of those Excel spreadsheets to figure out the number of stitches, because it's crazy. I do a slightly easier method, just more like weighing, and what I want to say, I use the surface area. A little bit quicker, a little bit sloppier maybe, but of course having a little extra yarn is always a good idea for consistency too. So if you see me there, hopefully I'll be wearing that top. Hopefully I'll have it up on the blog for free before I go, so you can make one too. And yeah, so if you're in Portland, Oregon in July, I hope I'll see you there. Otherwise, I'll be back on YouTube here the last Wednesday of July with some more new things. And yeah, let me know if there's something you want me to cover next time. Maybe we can go a little bit more in depth on Gage, or if there's another topic you guys want to see, let me know. Absolutely. So yeah, okay, you're really worried about doing a swatch because I don't understand them. Okay, I think I can answer that. So how do you make a swatch? What you can do is find that stitch multiple. Now, sometimes if it's a really complicated pattern, especially in a magazine, they will give you a specific pattern for the Gage swatch. So that's very simple. Look for that, usually up by the notes, before the actual pattern begins. Otherwise, you just want to, like I say, for me, all my garments so far have been really simple. The Sea Glass Summer Cardi, here we are. Ooh, there we are. To make the Gage swatch for this one, again, I was mentioning, this is a multiple of 2 plus 1. Super simple stitch pattern. You can see it's just double crochets and spaces with a row of double crochet. Just start crocheting till you've got, I would say to start a standard Gage swatch, I would crochet in whatever the main stitch is they're using in that pattern until you've got anywhere from probably 6 to 12 inches. 12 inches would be really big, but at least 6 inches wide. And then work whatever that main stitch pattern is. And if you find, as long as it's not like a 22 stitch repeat, if it's a relatively small repeat, if you find that that second row, you didn't quite do enough stitches on that one to finish it, not a big deal. You just want to make sure overall you've got about 6 inches or so of width. Work till you've got about 8 inches of length, and then that's your Gage swatch. You just kind of measure the center of it. You don't want to just work 4 by 4 because sometimes that first or last row isn't quite the same. You don't get quite the same gauge there. You want to be able to measure in the middle of your swatch. So make a real big one. Just follow the main stitch pattern until you've got about 6 inches. And then measure right in the middle. Amount of yarn needed for a project you're creating. Okay. So this one can be tricky, absolutely. And as a designer, a lot of times I'll make the garment and then I'll measure it and see afterwards. So I do a little bit of a retro figuring it out. But again, this is where your Gage swatch can come in handy. And here, a little bit, the bigger the Gage swatch, the better. What you can do is make your Gage swatch, measure it, the total, not just the middle. This time you want to measure the total. And then you can weigh it. Kitchen scales are really, really handy when measuring things like this with yarn. So what you do is you take your Gage swatch and you can put it on the kitchen scale and see how much it weighs. And then you go back to your ball band. Let me pick up a ball band here for the It's a Wrap rainbow. Let's see. This one is, because I do not have this memorized, 1,100 yards for every 7 ounces. So if I've got my kitchen scale set to ounces, then I can see, simple algebra, basically you do a proportions, 1,100 yards to 7 ounces, how many yards for my ounce. And that tells me how many yards made that Gage swatch. Now, let's say this Gage swatch was 12 inches by 12 inches, and I wanted to make a blanket that was 36 by 36. I know it's going to take 9 times that amount of yarn to make that blanket. So I hope that makes sense. Sorry, we've got a couple little trolls here, so I'm trying to ignore it. But so I hope that makes sense on how to measure the amount of yarn you'll need. Obviously for blankets. Oh, sorry about that. Lost the feed there for a second. Oh, thank you guys. Thank you for that. I appreciate it. It's hard to do all this from my phone and talk and read at the same time. Nobody needs that, right? Okay. So anyway, I hope that explains things about Gage and measuring how too much yarn you're going to use a little bit. So yeah, just hoping the tension remains the same. Let me tell you, me too. I will say that small changes in tension, if you find, you know, just that row is a little bit tighter or a little bit looser, that's where blocking can come in really handy too. And I talked about that a little bit on the last Moogly Facebook, or excuse me, we're on YouTube, the last YouTube live if you want to check that out. Blocking can really settle those stitches and even that out quite a bit too, at least visually. So that's another good place to try blocking. If your tension is just that little bit off, maybe, you know, one side just isn't quite as straight as the other, blocking can be a really big solution for that too. So anyway, I think that's it. I think that pretty well covers it, and I hope I've answered most of your questions. If not, leave them in the comments. I will absolutely come back and answer them everything I can. And I want to thank you so much for watching. I hope you will subscribe to the Moogly YouTube channel. I can't talk right now. Oh, hi, don't worry about being late. I will make sure that this goes up, and I will also be embedding this on mooglyblog.com so you can watch it anytime too. So yeah, thank you so much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed the show. I hope you learned something about blocking and gauge and pattern grading and how you can adjust your crochet garments to fit you better. So thanks so much for watching, everybody. Have a great day, and I'll see you next month. Bye-bye.